I believe I'm going to hand over first to our speakers, but we have Bernard Lane from the Home Office, Sally Lewis, who's Chief for Avon and Somerset Probation Trust, Professor Richard Tomlinson, and Detective Superintendent Anthony Williams, who are going to talk us through one of the kind of newer products, really, that the Academy is working on, which has been our learning set. And when we were last year looking at a potential topic, IOM came out as one of the top choices, and in fact, so popular, we ended up running it twice.
Good evening. With an audience, a microphone and a name like Andy Williams, I hope you're not expecting me to sing. You can tell the age profile of an audience when they laugh to that or not. You're obviously quite a young audience. Thank you very much. Andy Williams, Detective Superintendent from Avon and Somerset. This is my penultimate duty as a warranted police officer, so I'm very pleased to be doing this. The reason for me giving this presentation relates to a study I did in terms of desistance for masters, and I went on to write an academic peer-reviewed journal article in the Oxford Journal of Policing on desistance and integrated offender management in Bristol. What I'm going to cover in this presentation relates to evidence-based policing. I just want to touch on aspects of intensive supervision and the limited evidence that is available in relation to it, the IOM evidence that I managed to find out in Bristol, and then just talk around the need for better evidence in the future. In terms of evidence-based policing, the photograph you see there is a photograph of Professor Larry Sherman. In 1998, Larry wrote an article called Evidence-Based Policing, which I would commend to you, and certainly from the colleagues in the room here from the police. I say this because I'm just on my way out of the door, but we're not very good at implementing evidence, despite the fact that we use evidence to bring prosecutions. We're not very good at using it to inform policy. There is one study, or one academic views has collected some of these studies and estimates there are only 117 studies in policing which are moderately robust in their design methods. So we're not particularly good. What Larry says in terms of evidence-based policing is that follow the medical profession and use science and use evaluation, proper evaluation, to actually help inform policy. I think there's an awful lot to be said for that. I'm not a complete advocate and fan of Larry's in relation to it. Larry would advocate randomised controlled trials. I think there is a need for pragmatism sometimes, especially within the criminal justice system. In terms of integrated offender management, which is a form of intensive supervision, there is limited evidence to say it works. Part of my study, I went back to 1974 to 2004 and was only able to find 10 studies in England and Wales. Generally, the conclusions from those studies were that they were neutral in terms of whether intensive supervision works or not. And one of the slides I put up there, or the mentioned there, is the London Diamond Project, written by Dawson in 2011. That's actually a pretty good evidence document in relation to IOM, but again, the conclusion from that document was that there wasn't any strong evidence to suggest that IOM works, despite the fact of what Bernard said, and to all of us on our learning sets, IOM feels like the right thing to be doing. So, in terms of my study, what I did, I looked at arrest data, and I did a 6-month pre and post test in relation to integrated offender management in Bristol, and I also devised a scale of seriousness in terms of a measure. So what is Bristol integrated offender management? I appreciate integrated offender management has been launched across England and Wales. In Bristol, it was led by Sally and John Long, the photograph you see there. And I think that was absolutely key. And I'm not saying that because Sally's just to my side here, but the leadership that both of those showed in terms of a joint approach to this was absolutely fundamental. In effect, Bristol IOM, it related to 8 pathways that some of you will be familiar with, and they include drug treatment, alcohol treatment, and accommodation, and it fast-tracked offenders through to those pathways. They were co-located, police, prisons, probation and local authorities and others co-located in one area to share intelligence and manage offenders. In Bristol, similar to other IOMs, there was the carrot and stick. They had no choice that they were coming on the scheme, which you would often think from an academic perspective that you might see a defiance to that, but the research data that I managed to obtain showed to the contrary. That's just some of the descriptive data that I managed to find in terms of, and I won't go through that in any detail, other than to say that there were, I effectively found a control group. I had a cohort of 155 who started IOM in 2009 and finished it in 2010. So they had the treatment of IOM from start to finish. But what I found within that group was there were some people who came onto IOM, but they had no treatment. So effectively I had a bit of a control group that I could do some comparisons with. And another interesting group that I found there was that they came onto IOM, but they had no pathway. So they never went off to accommodation, drugs. They actually just stayed on IOM. But what they did have, which was quite important, was they had one-to-one cognitive discussions with the offender manager, be that from probation, be that from police or wherever. And that's quite an important group. In terms of the age profile, the bar chart you see behind me is quite a long tail in terms of normal offending groups. What you would normally expect to find is a big spike from the general population in terms of offending from 15 to 19, and then a really dramatic downward spike downwards in relation to it. What you see here, not surprisingly, is quite a long tail of those people that stay as prolific offenders for quite some time. This is my favourite slide. Effectively, what you have here, and I'll try and describe it to you. The first group that you see to the left, and I'll just come across and point to it, that group there, that's effectively the control group I mentioned. They came onto IOM and they had no treatment whatsoever in relation, but they came onto IOM. Their offending rates rose statistically significantly by 197%. So they came onto the scheme, their reoffending rates in relation to rearrest rose by 197%. The next group you see is no pathway but with contact. That group I mentioned who came onto IOM but only had one-to-one support from the offender manager, be that police or probation, as I say. And their reoffending rates reduced by 69%. Those that had a single pathway, their reoffending rates reduced by 79%. And those that had multiple pathways, their reoffending rates reduced by 62%, all of which were statistically significant. In terms of seriousness of arrest, and I won't go into the details here, but I devised a methodology for assessing seriousness of arrest in relation to the study, and I did a pre and post study for those. And again, in relation to the statistics for that, those that had no treatment, so again in my control group had no treatment whatsoever, their seriousness of arrest rose by 16%. Those that had treatment from IOM, in whatever form that was, their reoffending rates reduced by 67%. Now, my study has a lot of limitations, and I won't propose to go into those with you today, but they do have some academic limitations. The 6-month time frame for one arrest rate may be seen as another limitation as well, but I won't dwell on that. In terms of the future and IOM, it absolutely feels like the right thing to do. Certainly from our learning sets we got together, and it just feels like the right thing to do. The evidence, albeit limited, appears to show that it has promise. And what I would just like to urge all of you going into IOM in the future, in whatever format that may be, I would just like to urge the need for good evidence in terms of moving forward. The need, not just in terms of binary measures, I would suggest what we also need to look at, in addition to reconviction rates, we do need to look at arrest rates, we do need to look at seriousness, we do need to provide a cost-benefit analysis for IOM as we move forward. I think there's a need to longitudinally assess and research IOM. And the Holy Grail, as Professor Larry Sherman would say, or I would say in relation to this, what about a randomised controlled trial of integrated offender management? Are we brave enough as criminal justice services to do that? They do it in medicine for life-threatening illnesses. Why can't we do it in the criminal justice? Thank you.
I was just going to quickly reflect that I don't think we can be accused of not making the most in these austere times of actually you've had a 5 for 1. And I was trying to think how best to sum up. So we've had a poet, a professor, a policymaker, a pioneer, and an evidence-based policeman.